Groundhog Day. Talking about names again. What's in a name? A lot. Going to dive deeper into that. This is the marketing podcast for podcasters. Build a big podcast. All about growing your podcast audience, getting more people to your podcast, making content people care about, making content that makes a difference in the lives of people who listen to it, and that makes a difference in your life, makes you money. This is the audio edition of my weekly newsletter that is called Big Podcast Insider. You will find it at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is the audio edition of issue number 198. And here's what I'm talking about. Dotcom Domains, ego stroke or good decision. Be a guest here. Book your interview now. It's an opportunity for you. How to name or rename your podcast. Robot podcasting and more. This trick will make your podcast sound bigger. The bad boys of podcasting. Also, some classified ads, things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, and make a podcast that people care about. The things that we talk about here on this podcast. This episode of Build a Big Podcast brought to you by Riverside.fm, a virtual studio that makes recording and editing at the highest quality possible, accessible to anyone. You want more people to your podcast? One of the things that you can do is tape your podcast in video. I love using videos for social media content. Riverside.fm will handle that. Not only getting you up to 4K video resolution, but also chopping up your podcast into small snackable parts for social media. They call it AI magic clips. Automated transcripts. They are 99% accurate. You're going to automatically transcribe and caption your recordings in seconds with their AI-powered technology. It's accurate, reliable, and it supports more than 100 languages. You want to make your podcast accessible. And speaking of those transcripts, if you want to edit via text, Riverside.fm gets you into the podcasting game as quickly as you can. You don't have to be a technical person. All you have to do is have a message. You speak into a microphone. Riverside.fm handles the rest. I want you to try it for free. Here's how to do that. Go to Riverside.fm, get a free account. They're going to give you 2 hours to play around, look under the hood, kick the tires, see how it works for you if you like it. And I'm talking about the editing, the 4K video, the transcripts, the AI magic clips. You're going to get that all. I've got a discount code for you off any paid plan. You'll get 15% off with the code BIGPODCAST, BIGPODCAST. That's Riverside.fm. Go there, get the free account, check it out for a couple of hours, see how you like it. And if you want to stick around, 15% off with the discount code BIGPODCAST, BIGPODCAST. You know how this works. I go from thing to thing to thing, every element of the newsletter. And in between those things, I play this sound. That's how you know I'm moving on. That's how you know if you want the links, more information, you want to see everything in writing, go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You ready? Dotcom Domains, ego stroke or good decision? Probably somewhere in between. I talked about this in the previous episode of Big Podcast Insider, talking about naming, rebranding this podcast, Build a Big Podcast. You can see the episode art different, the podcast art different, and there are more changes that are coming. I have not changed the name, but a podcaster did ask me a related branding question this week. He said, should I buy the .com domain that's the name of my podcast? Meaning, if the name of your podcast is Big Podcast, would you benefit by buying bigpodcast.com? And the answer is maybe. .com domains, they're like phone numbers. At one time, they were very important. Now, maybe a little less important. It's easier to find things online with search engines. People are clicking on links. A lot of people find you through social media. Also, links. Fewer and fewer people are typing in domain names. With that said, it's still important. It still says something about your podcast, your company, whatever you're promoting, if you've got a good domain name. You're going to trust me a little bit more when I've got bigpodcast.com as opposed to David the Podcasting Podcaster.blogspot.com. And I've seen people do that. They'll come up with crazy names trying to save themselves a little bit of money. Well, bigpodcast.com, that wasn't available. So I got Big Podcast with BIGG and then a dash in the middle, .net, .co. I think CO is the worst. I mean, we're starting to see it more and more often. But I remember the first time I saw a .co on a business card. I said, oh, man, you got a typo. He said, no, the .com was taken. So we just went with .co. Okay. All right. It's the poor man's .com, .net, .org, .io. Here's the deal on domains as I currently see this market. If the name you want isn't currently registered, you can get it for whatever, 12, 15 bucks a year. Yeah, get it. If it's on the aftermarket, meaning that somebody else has it and it is for sale, if you can get it for a price that you feel comfortable with, why not? What is comfort? You know, if I saw anything for under $1,500, I'd probably jump on it. A little over $1,500, you know, maybe if it were the name of the company. I've spent more than that on a domain before. I spent more than that on bigpodcast.com. I got it on the aftermarket. But only for things that I'm really invested in. It can't just be a brain fart. Oh, this would be nice. I don't even do that with something that's 12 or 15 bucks. I don't want to have a bunch of domains that I've got to continue to re-register. Or if I link them, that I've got to continue to re-register them because of everybody linking to them. It is better for your podcast and for your branding to have everything under one domain. Now you got to hold on to the domain, because if you lose it, then you're in trouble. I think the biggest benefit if you're looking to get a .com domain name and the one you want is either owned by somebody else and in use, or it's for sale at a price and you're thinking like, no way, I'm not going to pay that much for it. It forces you to get creative. I don't know that the name of this company would be bigpodcast.com had my first idea been available. And I'm not sure if the first idea was available. I will tell you a little bit about this though. I knew the concept that I wanted for this company. You wanted to grow a podcast. And it could have been a huge podcast or a gigantic podcast or a giant podcast, massive podcast. I wrote down a ton of words, synonyms for big. Big is short, and that's how people speak. So big podcast, that was worth more to me than massive podcast or huge podcast. The things that I could have gotten a .com for 12 or 15 bucks. At the same time, as I mentioned, if you can get creative, you might be able to come up with something better. I worked on a podcast called American Underground, and AmericanUnderground.com, not available. So I think it was listenunderground.com. Clever, right? Phoebe Judge has a podcast called Criminal. Tagline, I'm Phoebe Judge, and this is Criminal. Thisiscriminal.com. That's the website. Procter & Gamble. You know, Procter & Gamble has probably, I don't know, a dozen billion-dollar brands. Crest, Tide, Secret, the deodorant company. Underarms.com. That's the domain that takes you there. And secret.com. Not a bad domain name. Anyway, that's my general thought on aftermarket domains and domains in general. Yeah, get it if you can. Absolutely. If you are in the trenches doing the work, if you are talking about something that you're going to continue to talk about and build a brand around, this is like Times Square versus a mall out in the suburbs that's empty. Get the domain name, use it, put yourself behind it. It could be worth it. And most domain names, by the way, not nearly as expensive as you think. If you were to go to a domain name that you want and you see that it's owned by somebody, a broker is selling it, and let's say it's $7,000, you can probably get that for about 50% of that, maybe 40%. Go in there with cash, more or less. Say, I've got a credit card. You go in there ready to buy. I'm ready to make this deal today. Boom, do it. Most people are pretty flexible on these things. The domain market, woo, up and down, up and down. These brokers, they are ready to deal, especially at the end of the month. They're making a quota. They want to get a bonus. They're not necessarily the owners, but I found the owners pretty easy to deal with. They're not having a bunch of deals come to them all the time. Most of these guys, they've got hundreds and hundreds of domains. Maybe people come through, maybe people don't. But it's possible to get a pretty good deal, definitely better than the price you see on the website for the most part. If you're curious about this, you want to work with somebody that can help you broker these deals, I've done dozens of them. Happy to work with you. Reach out to me, bigpodcast.com. By the way, speaking of getting creative with domain names, I've got a free tool that you can use. You type in keywords that you want to use. It spits out domains that are available now for 12 or 15 bucks right now. Again, free tool. I've got it linked on the website, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. Big Podcast AMP. Let's talk about making money with your podcast. That AMP stands for Audio Monetization Program. It's a personal coaching program, and it's going to help you do three things. One, grow your podcast audience. Two, get people talking about your podcast. Three, make more money with your podcast and your podcasting skills. I've got all the details at bigpodcast.com/amp. It is a long letter. Stick it out. This is important. If you're ready to do the work, I'm ready to help you. But I want you to know what you're getting into. It's called Big Podcast Amp. It's at bigpodcast.com/amp. Go there now. Check it out. If you got questions, reach out to me. Be a guest here. Here. You can book an interview right now. A few years ago, a podcaster named Engel Jones, he made a goal to interview 1,500 people for his podcast. 12-minute convos. Still a lot of time. 12 minutes times 1,500. Plus, you got to get on. You've got to get off. You've got to schedule everything. You can imagine the time that this guy's put into his podcast. Today, he's done about double that number of interviews, about 3,000 or so. And he's finishing out the year doing even more. If you want to be part of this, this is very cool. For one, you get to see the behind the scenes of a massive interview operation as far as volume. If you're like most podcasters, you've done dozens, maybe hundreds of podcast interviews. You want to get into the thousands? Watch how Engel's doing it. You can schedule a time right now. I've got the link at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. The interview is about you. He wants to find out all about you, so you don't need to do any research or any special preparation. Again, it's a cool experience and also a learning experience watching this guy work. He gets in, he gets out, a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is a complete experience for listeners. It's going to be a complete experience for you. I don't know how he does it. Maybe you want to do it yourself. It's remarkable, right? Can you imagine that? Sitting on the other side of 3,000 interviews. That's going to get you on any panel. That's going to get you all sorts of speaking gigs. That's going to get you any guest spot that you want, because you can go on a podcast and talk about what it's like to do a podcast with 3,000 interviews. You want to be a part of it? I've got the link, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. How to name or rename your podcast. Continuing this thread. If you are thinking about changing the name of your podcast, and as I mentioned earlier, people are asking me about that with the rebrand that I'm doing for this podcast. Well, are you going to change the name? I am not. Name change, a little more complicated than changing the artwork. A little more complicated than changing the format even, because you've got all this goodwill, links, people talking about your podcast. Hopefully you have that. And if not, look me up, bigpodcast.com/amp. But if you do, you want to think about that. You want to change everything that you're doing or just the branding? If you do want to change everything, including the name, you're ready to move forward. I've got some tools listed. They are linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. Brainstorming tools, vetting tools. You don't want to come out with a name that's insulting to people. And people get weird about this stuff. There was a company, I'm not going to even go into this too deeply. Mailing list company used a word that in Sanskrit meant something. They sort of tried to hijack that word. It didn't really fit. A lot of people thought, you're using a word that means something to us for your business. You're taking it in a commerce direction, and that's offensive to us. They put all this time, money, effort, energy, personal and company reputation into this rebrand. Didn't ask anybody who spoke Sanskrit or knew Sanskrit. Would you be offended if we used that word like this? Cost them a lot of money. Etymologies. I've got some resources linked to talk about etymology. Cautionary tales. I'm telling you one right now. I worked with a lot of acts in the music business. We would run into situations. Bush was one of them. If you remember the band Bush, I don't remember exactly how this worked, but in one country, they had to go by the name Bush X. And that's fairly common. There's a current band called Ghost. They had some naming issues, not everywhere, but in certain countries. And you'll see that also in restaurants. Burger King, there's one place in the world that Burger King, they were there first before the Burger King came in. So they're still called Burger King there. And I'm not sure if the other Burger King is actually operating, maybe as Burger King X. Anyway, cautionary tales, you do have to think about that. These are tales that you'll learn from. They're pretty entertaining too. You don't want to repeat them, but also some lessons to keep you from doing those things yourself. Also, agencies and services if you need help with a rebrand. A buddy of mine who's an author, He told me he doesn't write a book unless he feels it's on a topic that he's okay with talking about for 3 years. Because he's got to write the book. It takes a little while for the book to get going. I'll say this, you can always change your mind if you do rename your podcast or go in a different direction. If something doesn't work for you, I don't think you have to throw good money after bad. Change it up, move on. But it's good to think about this stuff ahead of time. You want to be confident. It's like a logo. I talked about .com domain names earlier. David the Podcaster for podcasters.blogspot.com. I'm going to feel better about myself and more comfortable telling you bigpodcast.com than a URL like that. Think about these things before you jump into something. I've got this all written down. All the links to these resources. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. Robot podcasting and more. This is from Radio Days Asia. Some interesting thoughts. Shrikant Joshi, I've talked about him before. Shrikant's an interesting guy. He's in Pune, India, a little town about 9 times as big as New York City. He was a shock jock doing FM radio there. Speaking of guys that speak Sanskrit, this guy speaks like 7 languages. And because of that, he can really dive deep into a culture, find out what's going as far as their podcasting. He's written up some very interesting things about what's happening with podcasting around the world. He just got back from Malaysia. He's talking about robot podcasting. He also listed some very human things that will help you with your podcast. Things like preparation, team, DNA, authenticity, respect, quality over quantity, the journey, play to your strengths, fun, loyalty. I don't think you or anybody listening to this right now is like, wow, my mind is blown. These are basic elements of how businesses are built and how people connect one person to another person. But are you doing these things? These things are very easy to overlook. I'll go into one of these a little bit deeper because I've been doing a lot of it over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to be doing some live radio stuff this week, just an hour. I'm not the host, I'm a producer. I've got to get the host what he needs. There are 4 guests involved in this process. I'm doing all the pre-production. I'm doing all the pre-interviews. I'm getting the host up to speed on these things. I'm working with an executive producer. I'm getting her up to speed on these things. And there is a lot of preparation because when this man goes on the radio, it is live and it is everywhere. He wants to be able to get in and get out, delivering a beginning, a middle, and an end. He doesn't want to get to the middle and get stuck or have dead air or look foolish or make the guest look foolish. He wants to be able to get through it. So you've got to prepare. I would say that we are arguably over-preparing, but it's his show. So I'm giving him exactly what he needs. Some people are more comfortable playing it fast and loose. Some people not so much. If you're taping your show as a podcaster, and this is what I do with my podcast and radio show, everything is taped. It's not going out live. We've got wiggle room. If we run into a problem or something isn't very good, we can fix it. We can ditch it. We've got options. Live radio is not like that. So you're going to over-prepare a lot of times. Do you need to prepare more for your podcast? Think about that. If you're not getting what you want, maybe so. I've got these full lists, which again, I love these basic lists, man. They are the foundational elements of podcasting and human connections that great podcasts are built upon. So if you want to see the whole list, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. This trick will make your podcast sound bigger. I've done the work to become a pretty competent podcast and radio host. I am behind the mic daily. I edit my own stuff. Not all of it, but this show, all of it. I've got, 600 and something episodes of this. Just this one. Overall, probably done 2,000 or 3,000 episodes. Plus the daily show. Add another 2,000 onto that. When I started, I had to work pretty hard to get through a single episode. And it was far from smooth. I was nervous, especially when somebody who had been doing radio longer than I had would approach me. If I've got one regret about my radio experience, it's getting feedback earlier. I just wasn't that confident. I was like, okay, I'm just going to ignore this. Pretend everything is fine. So I was a little bit scared when a program director for a station that I was working at, when he brought me into the studio, he said, "Hey, step in here for a minute." So, uh-oh. I thought we were going to do an air check. I thought we were going to be listening to my stuff and he was going to be critiquing it. That's not what happened. He just asked me to do some liners. I remember I was kind of sick that day. My voice is a little bit weird. And I was like, "Hey, it's David and you're listening to blank, 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 blank." Whatever the liner was. Station ID, basically. He said, "Oh, thanks, man. I'm trying to get different voices on the station." The more voices you have, people find that more interesting. The same voice, there's some comfort to it. But think about even this podcast that you're listening to right now with me, just me. A little bit harder to listen to than a conversation because it's not as stimulating. It might be better for you if I had a co-host and we were talking about these things. Maybe something to think about with the rebrand. Anyway, I did some liners with this guy, and that's the big lesson. We're trying to get more voices on the station. The more voices you have, the more interesting it is to listeners. Great advice for your podcast. And here's something that you can do right now, even if you're like me and you're doing a monologue show. If you get emails from listeners, social media message from listeners, and you want to share those things in your podcast, you could read those things or use an AI-generated voice, something like 11 Labs. And there's a billion of them. I've got some linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com, issue number 198. Change up the voice. And you can say it's AI. I've got an AI-generated voice. James Cridland from Pod News, if you're familiar with him, he does this very well. He'll play it as if it's a real voice, and then the voice will say, "I was generated by 11 Labs AI." Do we need to do that ethically? I don't know. But it also brings people into the creation process, which can also be beneficial for you because people feel like they understand what you're doing and they are part of what you are doing. I've got more thoughts on this, an additional article that I wrote. It is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. You want a bigger audience for your podcast? Assuming that your hosting skills are up to speed and your content is solid. It is, right? All right, let's assume that. The next thing that I would look at is how consistent you are with releasing new episodes. Are you doing it every week? Are you doing it a couple of times a week? Maybe your consistency is once a month. People expect to hear from you once a month, and that's just fine. It doesn't have to be a certain frequency, but it does need to be consistent for people to get you into their schedule and for you to become a part of their lives. Consistent releases in podcasting are crucial for building and maintaining an audience. When listeners know they can expect a new episode on a regular schedule, it builds trust, it shows that you're reliable, and that predictability encourages listeners to make your podcast part of their routine. If I know I've got the New York Times or NPR, whatever news outlet, delivering a daily podcast every morning, and if I'm getting breakfast or on a commute where I need the news, that becomes part of my routine. If that podcast is not there, I'm going to go find something else to become part of my routine. If you're the one who's not there, am I going to go back to you? Maybe not. That's why you want to be consistent. Let people know what to expect and then deliver on it. I've got a funny joke about this. You know I love to put a little humor in these newsletters. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com, the issue 198. Classified ads for you. These are things that will help you to grow your podcast, get more people to your podcast, connect with podcast listeners. NoteJoy, simplify your podcast production. I love this thing. NoteJoy makes podcast production with guests, co-hosts, and producers easy. It lets you collaborate in real time and across time zones. You can use your phone. You can use a desktop. It is great for when you've got an idea, you type it into your phone, go to your desktop to work on your episode. It's there. It's very cool, what they call second brain. You're going to have all your notes there in one place, but multiple places because, again, it's going to work on your phone, it's going to work on your desktop, or anybody that you're working with. You can check it out. It's called NoteJoy. I've got it linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. Audio Pen. Speaking of prepping for your podcast or post-production of your podcast, episode notes, Audio Pen is the easiest way to convert messy thoughts into clear text, including podcast outlines, or take your podcast, make your episode notes. You just hit record, you start rambling, or you upload your already recorded audio into Audio Pen. It spits out exactly what you need. I love it. It's a very cool tool. It's an independent developer. You're going to be amazed by it. This AI stuff. Woo. when you upload your audio, which is how Audio Pen works, you're either dictating your audio or uploading a recording. It's in your voice, literally. And the writing comes out in your voice as well. You can check it out, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. This is issue number 198. Hey, thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. If you want more from me, I talked about Big Podcast AMP, the audio monetization program. Bigpodcast.com/AMP. That's where it is. Bigpodcast.com/AMP. This is the easiest way for you to work personally with me. We will get you making money. We will get more people to your podcast. We will get you feeling better about your podcast so you can go out into the world, spread your message, do something that makes a difference in the world. I live and breathe this stuff. I would love to work with you. Bigpodcast.com/AMP. If you like the podcast, you want more of it, you're going to hear me frequently, at least every week. Sometimes more than 1 week. You want to follow the rebrand. That's happening right now too. This is how to make sure you never miss an episode. It's bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I make it easy to subscribe. Go there, steal that page, use it. I mean, you want to change the stuff, change it to your podcast from mine, but use the page, steal that copy. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. One click is all it takes. I've got an iPhone link, an Android link, an RSS feed link. You're subscribed. Every episode of Build a Big Podcast delivered to your phone, your Android, your iPhone. Maybe you got a desktop. Can do that too. It's all at bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Go there now before you forget. And I'll see you on the next episode of Build a Big Podcast.